Hello there, y'all. I'm Space Robot 1, back at it again with a very different type of video today, because this one is not a gaming video. I know, very surprising. Today, I'm going to be ranking the late Roman emperors. So, what we're defining as a late Roman emperor for our purposes today is Diocletian after. So all the way to Romulus Augustus. So, you can see pretty clearly that there's no, Arcadius here. That's because we're using the Western Roman emperors once the empire splits. This is so, we don't have any overlap if I want to do a ranking all the Byzantine emperors or something like that video later. So let's jump right into it. So our very first guy, Diocletian, I'm going to be giving an A tier. Now Diocletian, he reformed the bureaucracy quite a bit. He had this cool rags to riches story, and then he famously just retired. He didn't want to be emperor anymore. The reason he doesn't get S tier is because some of his reforms failed. He failed to curb inflation, and, generally he was good, but he wasn't quite worthy of an S tier. So up next here we have Emperor Maximian. I'm going to be giving a C tier. Maximian was competent enough. He wasn't really anything to write home about. He didn't do very much. He mostly just worked with Diocletian, so that's why he's getting a C tier. After that, we have Constantius I, who is Constantine the Great's father, and he's getting a B tier. Constantius I was a very competent general. He fought the Picts. That's why he died suddenly at York. Most of his fame, of course, comes from his son, but he was competent. I'd say more competent than Maximian. Then we have Galerius, who I'm also going to be giving a B tier. Galerius, kind of like Constantius, was a competent general. Along with Diocletian, he actually ended up sacking the capital of the Sasanian Persians. And of course, the Sasanian Persians were a very big and very powerful enemy of Rome, so that's a pretty big achievement. So now we have Severus II, or Valerius Severus as he's listed here. I was debating whether to give him D or F tier. He wasn't very good, as you can tell. I think I'm going to go with F tier. He was emperor briefly, didn't really do anything. He just got deposed, fled to Ravenna, and died. That's pretty much all he's known for. Maxentius, I think, is also going to have to get an F tier. Unrecognized emperor, lost to Constantine, died. His only thing he's famous for is losing to Constantine. Then we have Maximus Daza, the last great, well, not really great, because his persecution was small and no one likes persecutions, but the last real persecutor of Christians. Again, didn't do anything, unrecognized usurper, F tier, because he didn't do anything. Then we have Licinus, another character in that giant civil war. I'm going to give him D tier because he actually managed to work with Constantine the Great on the Edict of Milan. He at least did something and was able to be recognized by his fellows, so he gets D tier for that. So now we have the legend himself. You all know his name, Constantine I, Constantine the Great, of course, getting S tier. Now, I'm not going to argue that he was necessarily the best person, morally, because of course he killed his first son. But, that was more normal back then, but, it's bad. But he was a very good emperor. He's, of course, the one who converted the empire to Christianity. He united it under his sole rule, which was very impressive for the time. He kept it going. I think it would have collapsed far earlier if it wasn't for Constantine I. And we definitely have to acknowledge that. So then we move on to his son and one of his heirs, Constantine II, who gets F tier. Constantine II was trash. Destabilized the empire, didn't do anything, tried to murder his brothers. Bad emperor, goes in the F tier. So now I'm going to actually go out of order here and do Constans before Constantius II. Constans was the youngest son of Constantine the Great, as opposed to Constantine II, who was his eldest son, and Constantius II here was the middle. Constans didn't do very much. He was the youngest. Constantine II tried to push him around, and he ended up predeceasing Constantius II. So I'm going to be giving him kind of middle C tier. Constantius II was the one who came out on top of the three brothers. But his religious policies were terrible. He was a semi-Arian, which has caused both the Arians and the Nicenes to kind of hate each other and conflict. And there was a bunch of war throughout his reign. So although he came out on top, I'm actually ranking him the lowest. Well, no, never mind. I forgot Constantine II was down there. That's how kind of bad he was. But he's getting D tier. And we have Julian. Julian the Apostate, who was a satirist and the last pagan emperor. After this, all these dudes are Christian. But, so, Julian here, kind of a weirdo. He was really into fire magic. His policies didn't really help anyone. They were just kind of paganism for the sake of paganism, really. And I don't think he was a very good emperor. I think he was actually a really bad emperor, and for that reason, he's going in F tier. Got Jovian. Jovian was a commander and Julian's replacement after Julian unexpectedly died. Again, kind of middle of the road, nothing to write home about. You know, military commander, didn't do very much. So, just because the empire wasn't doing the best at that period, I think I'm going to give him D tier. So now we have Valentinian I, also known as Valentinian the Great, who founded the Valentiniac dynasty. And although his name is the Great, I don't actually think he was that great of an emperor. He wasn't up here. He held the empire together successfully, but he did kind of do that whole recruiting barbarians thing, which wasn't the best, and he didn't really like expand or really permanently defeat any enemies. I know he couldn't really be expected to due to the decline of the empire at the time, but I still don't think he's worthy of the high echelons. So I think I'm going to be giving him either B or C. I'm going to give him C for now. I might bump him up later. Yeah, no, he's a B tier, I suppose. For his military successes alone, he's B tier. Then we have his sons, Valens, and his brother Valens and his son Gratian. Valentinian II is also his son. Valens was less competent than Valentinian I. He was just kind of there because he was the brother, of course. It made sense. Not as competent, not really that important. D tier. Gratian. Gratian was Valentinian I's successor in the West, his eldest son. Well, most of the West. He had Gaul and Britannia and Hispania. Valentinian II had Italy. Gratian was alright. He was, he was the first emperor not to use the title Pontifex Maximus, which was, of course, then used for the Bishop of Rome. But he wasn't really that outstanding, so I think I'll give him C tier. Valentinian II came to the throne when he was a child, puppet his whole life, did nothing, F tier. So this is again a little out of order, so I'm going to be ranking Magnus Maximus here first. Most people don't know Magnus Maximus unless you happen to be Welsh, because he's very important to the Welsh. He was the last emperor to really exercise control over Britain and large parts of northern Gaul. And although he isn't known very well, he was actually surprisingly competent as an emperor. He was a good general, and he would have been successful and probably founded a dynasty, potentially, if it wasn't for his betrayal by Theodosius I the Great. So I think Magnus Maximus, although his name is a little silly, is going to be getting B tier. So now, y'all, we're coming up on my definitely most controversial opinion of this tier list. Theodosius I, y'all know him. He's the last of these guys to rule the empire solo. All the rest of these guys ruled only in the West. There was a different emperor in the East who's not on the list. He's known as Theodosius the Great. Everyone loves him. Everyone thinks he's good. I don't think he's that good. I think he hurt the empire. He put his dynastic interests above the interests of Rome. Magnus Maximus was fully competent in doing his job, but he betrayed him for familial connections, so he could get his family more in power over in the West. And his two sons that he put as heirs, Honorius, who we're going to rank soon, in the west, and Arcadius in the east, they're both completely incompetent. Theodosius I, however competent he may have been, did nothing like long-term for the empire because he was just too blinded by his familial goals. So Theodosius I, even though he is Theodosius the Great, is getting a C tier. So then we have his son Honorius. I don't even have to explain this one, really. Most folks familiar with late Roman history know Honorius was just a joke of an emperor. Complete garbage, did nothing, useless, F tier. So we're now entering into the era where all these next few Roman emperors, one would only reign in the west, like Honorius, but they'd all have the third after their name. And they were all pretty bad. Constantine III, really useless usurper, F tier. Constantius II, the third, Constantius III, that was Constantine III, this is Constantius III. Useless usurper, ruled for 7 months, F tier. Valentinian III, his one good thing. The empire was collapsing, but the one good thing that happened was that they managed to defeat, his general Aetius managed to defeat Attila the Hun. That is an achievement. However, Valentinian III then had the bright idea of killing Aetius for some reason. So he really doesn't get credit for any of the stuff that happened during his reign, so guess where he's going? The F tier area. Goodbye. So these next two guys were both pretty bad. Petronius Maximus, useless puppet, usurper after the Valentiniac dynasty. All that stuff. Didn't do very much. F tier. Avitus was especially bad, and I'm going to give him the first spot on the second level of F tier because of it. He basically caused the Vandals to sack Rome by breaking betrothals into usurpation. So he gets especially low ranks. But after him, we have the legend that every Roman memer on the internet wants you to know about. That's right, Majorian. It's Majorian, guys. I kind of want to put him in S tier just for the memes. I really do, but I'm going to put him in A tier. If y'all don't know Majorian, he was the last hope for the empire. The last hope. He was a competent military commander, knew what he was doing, went on campaigns to bring parts of Gaul and Hispania back, defended Italy from the barbarians, and he would have restored Africa too if he weren't assassinated. Literally, Majorian could have preserved the Western Roman Empire as long as the Eastern Roman Empire. It could have stayed along kind of like the Byzantines did afterwards. Not that the Byzantines and the Romans were exactly the same thing, but we'll get into that later. But anyway, yeah, he could have preserved it for hundreds of more years, but it got crushed out too early. If he had gone through with his plans, definitely S tier. Didn't get that far, so he's A tier. The rest of these guys, they're not really that good. So these next three guys were all basically the same, because they were all puppets of the same German general Ricimer. They didn't have any power, none of them did, these next three. And they were all just the same Germanic general pulling the strings. For that reason, they're all F tier. Libius Severus, F tier, or Severus III. And Anthemius, F tier. And Oliberius, F tier. Glycerius, I think that's how you say his name. He was also... So, actually, he managed to stop the Goths from invading Italia twice. He's still pretty incompetent and decline, sort of a very decline style Roman emperor. But I'll give him D tier because he did something. Julius Nepos, East Roman puppet in West Rome, got exiled to Dalmatia after he got deposed. Loser, failed to reconquer Rome. He tried to, but nah, he didn't even really try that hard. F tier. Romulus Augustus. This guy was a literal child. He's the last emperor of Rome. He was deposed by Odoacer, the Ostrogoth king. This dude was just like, he was 13. He has the skills of like, you know, a 13-year-old, so basically no skills relevant to being an emperor. But yeah, this was my ranking of the late Roman emperors, Diocletian to Romulus Augustus. If y'all disagree with anything I said or have anything to add, feel free to, put it down in the comments. I always want to learn new things about Roman history. Anyway, see y'all.